Pack your bags, old man. This lake belongs to me now. The woman in the light blue suit screamed those words through a megaphone while 3 patrol cars surrounded my lakefront property. Red and blue lights bounced off the water's surface like a fever dream. 4 officers stood in my yard, hands resting on their belts, waiting for me to make a wrong move. I did not make a wrong move. Instead, I sat perfectly still on my porch chair, steam rising from the coffee cup balanced on my knee. The morning sun caught the lake behind me, turning the water into liquid gold. A beautiful day, really. Perfect for watching someone destroy their own life without realizing it. Sir, we've received multiple reports of criminal trespassing. The deputy approached my porch with the careful stride of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. Do you have documentation proving you own this property? Behind him, the woman with the megaphone, Marguerite Pemberton, according to the vanity plate on her white G-Wagon that read Marg 1, was practically vibrating with anticipation. Her platinum blonde hair was styled in what I'd later learn she called her power bob. Her diamond earrings caught the morning light every time she moved her head. She looked like she'd already won. I set down my coffee cup, slowly, deliberately. Officer, before you proceed, I need you to pull up Section 47B of the State Water Code. My voice carried across the yard without effort. 42 years of legislative hearings had taught me how to project. Pay close attention to the author's name in the legislative record. The deputy's eyebrows rose slightly. I looked directly at Mrs. Pemberton, watching her triumphant smile begin to falter. Then ask Mrs. Pemberton if she's ever actually read the laws she claims to enforce. The megaphone lowered. The smile died. And somewhere in the back of her mind, Marguerite Pemberton felt the first tremor of something she probably hadn't experienced in 17 years. Doubt. But to understand how a retired government official ended up surrounded by police on his own property, we need to go back 3 months. To the day I signed away 42 years of my life for a piece of paper and a patch of land that would change everything. The cardboard boxes were stacked 3 deep against the wall of my office in Lansing. 42 years of memoranda, legislative drafts, hearing transcripts, and coffee-stained notes about water table measurements. On the wall behind my desk hung photographs I'd stopped really seeing years ago. Me shaking hands with 3 different governors, accepting awards from the EPA, standing at podiums in front of committees that controlled billions of dollars in environmental funding. The phone on my desk rang. I almost didn't answer it. Thatcher, 42 years drafting water legislation, and now you retire? Marcus's voice came through with the familiar mixture of exasperation and affection we'd developed over 3 decades of working together. The governor's office is losing its institutional memory. The new people don't even know where the filing cabinets are. I looked out the window at the Lansing skyline. Gray, industrial. Nothing like the lakes I'd spent my entire career trying to protect. 42 years is enough, Marcus. I've written every water law in this state, testified in 217 legislative hearings, had 3 heart attacks. I paused, letting the weight of that last statement settle. The doctors say stress will kill me faster than any chemical company ever could. Marcus was quiet for a moment. He knew about the heart attacks. He knew about the death threats after I'd testified against Meridian Chemical in '94. He knew about the years I'd spent looking over my shoulder, checking my car before starting it, varying my route home every day. So what's the plan? Sit on a beach somewhere? Something like that. My fingers drummed against the desk, an old habit, the rhythm of someone whose brain never stops parsing sentences and clauses and legal implications. Got a property coming through, part of my settlement. Settlement. Marcus's voice sharpened. What settlement? Thatcher, what did you do? I smiled, though he couldn't see it. Let's just say the state owed me 19 years of underpaid consulting fees, and they finally agreed it was cheaper to pay up than to let me go public with exactly how they'd been compensating whistleblowers who testified against their campaign donors. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. You magnificent lunatic, Marcus finally said. How much? Enough. Plus a property the state seized back in '87, a place called Pemberton Lake. Never heard of it. That's the point. 2 weeks later, I sat in a leather chair across from my attorney, signing the final documents that would close one chapter of my life and open another. The settlement agreement was 43 pages long. I should know, I'd helped draft the template that all state settlements were based on. The property deed was a single page, stamped with the state seal in red ink. Lot 7, Pemberton Lake, my attorney read aloud. 43 acres with direct lakefront access. The state seized it in 1987 from a developer who violated wetland protection codes. It's been sitting in state inventory ever since. Technically worthless on paper, but given its location and the current real estate market. I took the deed from his hands, studying the legal description, the coordinates, the boundaries. I remember this property. The words came out soft, almost reverent. I was the one who recommended seizure. A developer named Ashworth tried to drain a protected wetland to build condos. Thought he could get away with it because his cousin worked in the permits office. Small world, my attorney said. Smaller than you think. I signed my name at the bottom of the page, the same signature that appeared at the bottom of 37 years of environmental legislation. I know exactly what I wrote into law to protect this place. Every clause, every restriction, every penalty. The drive north took 4.5 hours, past Lansing, past the suburbs, past the small towns that dotted the Michigan landscape like afterthoughts. The roads got narrower as I went. The forests got thicker, and the billboards got fewer until there was nothing but pine trees and the occasional deer crossing sign. I found the turnoff just as the afternoon light was starting to slant golden through the trees. A dirt road. A rusted mailbox with no number. A wooden sign so weathered I could barely make out the words, Lot 7. The road wound through the forest for about half a mile before opening up onto the most beautiful piece of property I'd ever owned. The lake sat in a natural bowl between forested hills, its surface so still it looked like glass. The house, a 2-story cabin that had seen better decades, stood on a slight rise overlooking the water. Behind it, 43 acres of protected wetland stretched toward the horizon. Cattails swayed in the breeze. A great blue heron stood motionless at the water's edge, hunting. I stepped out of my pickup truck and breathed in. Clean air, pine trees, lake water, no car exhaust, no bureaucracy, no death threats, no deadlines. For the first time in 42 years, nothing was chasing me. That peace lasted exactly 90 seconds. The engine roar came from the main road, the unmistakable whine of a high-performance vehicle being driven by someone with more money than patience. I turned just in time to see a white Mercedes G-Wagon burst through the tree line, kicking up a cloud of dust that would have given any EPA inspector heart palpitations. The vehicle screeched to a stop maybe 20 feet from where I was standing. The driver's door opened. A woman emerged. She was somewhere in her late 50s, though the worksheet had done made exact estimates difficult. Platinum blonde hair sculpted into a precise bob, diamond earrings, a light blue designer suit that probably cost more than my first 3 cars combined. She looked at me the way a hawk looks at a field mouse, calculating the distance, measuring the effort required. Oh my! Her voice was honey poured over broken glass. You must be terribly confused, sweetheart. I'd met her type before. Boardrooms full of them. Legislative hearings packed with their lawyers. They all had the same look. That absolute certainty that the world existed primarily for their convenience. I don't believe we've met, I said. Marguerite Pemberton. She didn't offer her hand. I'm the president of Pemberton Lake Estates Homeowners Association. Her arm swept out in a gesture that encompassed my cabin, my shoreline, my entire 43 acres of state-granted property. And this belongs to our community. It has been 17 years. I looked at the cabin, at the lake, at the woman who apparently believed she owned them. I have a deed from the state of Michigan that says otherwise. Marguerite's laugh was the most condescending sound I'd heard since my last legislative hearing. She reached into her G-Wagon and produced a leather folder thick with documents. Whatever paperwork you think you have is obviously outdated. Let me educate you. She fanned the documents out like a poker player revealing a winning hand. HOA charter, property maps, meeting minutes, photographs of improvements, docks, boat ramps, what looked like a rental facility down by the water's edge. We've invested over $200,000 improving this waterfront, she said. We've maintained it, insured it, and turned it into a community treasure. Your little piece of paper means nothing against 17 years of beneficial use. I studied the documents she was showing me. The charter had no state filing number. I'd written the statute requiring them in 1991. The map used property boundaries that didn't match county records. I knew because I'd helped establish the digital mapping standards in 2003. The meeting minutes were missing half the required signatures for quorum, a violation of the HOA governance code I'd personally testified about in legislative hearings. And that beneficial use argument she was citing? I'd written the statute that defined it. She was quoting it wrong. Fascinating documents, Mrs. Pemberton. I kept my voice mild, unthreatening. I'll review them carefully. She smiled like a cat that had just eaten the canary, the goldfish, and most of the parakeet. You have 72 hours to vacate this property. After that, I'm calling the authorities and having you removed as a trespasser. She tucked her folder back into the G-Wagon with the satisfied air of someone who'd won battles like this 100 times before. Don't make this ugly, sweetheart. I always win. The G-Wagon roared back down the dirt road, leaving me standing in a cloud of dust with a deed in my hand and 72 hours to work with. 72 hours. That was more than enough time. I didn't unpack that night. Instead, I set up my laptop on the kitchen table, connected to the cellular hotspot I'd brought, and started doing what I'd done every night for 42 years. I read the law. The Pemberton Lake Estates HOA had been incorporated in 2007. I found the incorporation documents in the State Business Registry, but when I searched for the actual charter filing, the required registration that would give the HOA legal authority to enforce rules and collect dues, I found nothing. 3 different databases, 4 different search parameters. Nothing. This wasn't an oversight. In Michigan, an HOA without a filed charter was like a police officer without a badge. The costume might look official, but the authority behind it was pure fiction. I kept digging. Pemberton Lakeside Rentals had a professional website. Kayak rentals at $75 per hour. Paddleboard rentals at $60 per hour. Private dock access at $200 per day. Something called an exclusive lake experience package for $500 that included champagne and a sunset cruise. The booking calendar was nearly full for the next 3 months. My coffee went cold as I did the math. $12,000 per month during peak season, minimum. Over 12 years of operation, that was potentially $1.7 million in revenue, generated on my property, using structures built without permits, by people who had no legal right to be there. I switched to the state environmental database, the same one I'd helped design back in '98 when we finally got the budget for digital records. Section 31 of the Wetland Protection Act. All construction within 500 feet of protected wetlands requires environmental impact assessment and state permits. Section 32. Commercial operations on protected waterways require additional licensing from the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. Section 33. Violations are punishable by fines up to $50,000 per incident and potential criminal charges for repeat offenders. I looked out the window at the docks silhouetted against the moonlit water. The boat ramp, the rental facility with its cheerful Pemberton Lakeside Rentals sign. Every single structure out there violated at least 3 sections of state law. Laws I personally drafted. Laws I'd testified about in committee hearings. Laws I'd fought to strengthen every time a developer tried to water them down. But it was what I found next that made me set down my coffee cup and stare at my laptop screen for a long, long moment. Section 47B of the State Water Code, the Waterfront Property Rights Provision. I scrolled down to legislative history, the footnotes, the record of who had drafted each section. Principal drafter, T.A. Greaves, Senior Legislative Counsel, 1994. My own name staring back at me from a law I'd written 3 decades ago to protect Michigan's waterways from exactly this kind of exploitation. I'd never imagined I'd be the one using it. The county records told the rest of the story. Over the past 12 years, 17 properties in the Pemberton Lake area had changed hands. All of them sold at prices significantly below market value, 20 to 40% below comparable properties in neighboring counties. All of them purchased by one of 3 companies: Ashworth Holdings, LLC, Lakefront Development Partners, or PLP Investments. 3 shell companies, all registered to the same address, all with the same registered agent. I searched Ashworth combined with Pemberton Lake. The results are loaded. My blood ran cold. Colton Ashworth. Owner, Ashworth Construction. Marguerite Pemberton Ashworth since 2003. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't just an HOA president overstepping her authority. This was a criminal enterprise. Marguerite used the HOA to harass homeowners, manufactured violations, accumulating fines, liens that made properties unsellable. Then her husband's companies swooped in to buy the distressed properties at a fraction of their value. Renovate. Resell at 3 times the purchase price. 17 families in 12 years. Some of them had probably lived on this lake for generations. I had enough evidence to file complaints with 3 different state agencies. But I wanted more. I wanted to understand exactly how deep this went. I wanted names, dates, dollar amounts, victims who would be willing to testify. I wanted to know everything, because Marguerite Pemberton had given me 72 hours to vacate, and I intended to use every single minute of them. The 72 hours came and went. I didn't vacate. I barely slept. By the time the sun rose on the 4th day, I had a folder of evidence 3 inches thick and a list of questions that would keep any prosecutor busy for months. Marguerite didn't wait until the sun was fully up. I was on my 3rd cup of coffee, standing on the porch watching the mist rise off the lake, when the convoy appeared. 5 vehicles in formation, like a military operation targeting a single retired bureaucrat with a deed and a coffee cup. The white G-Wagon led the way. Behind it came a black BMW that practically screamed lawyer. Then a Ford F-250 pickup with Ashworth Construction emblazoned on the doors. 2 more SUVs brought up the rear, carrying what I could only assume were HOA board members or hired intimidation. They parked in a semicircle facing my cabin. Doors opened in sequence. Bodies emerged. Marguerite first, of course. Light blue suit, different cut from before but the same aggressive power statement. Megaphone in one hand, folder of documents in the other. From the BMW came a man in his 60s wearing a 3-piece gray suit that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments. Silver hair, silver cufflinks, the kind of practiced confidence that came from 30 years of billing $400 an hour. The construction truck disgorged a big man with a red face and the kind of build that suggested a former athlete gone to seed. Colton Ashworth, I presumed. The husband. The one who actually built the illegal structures. The one who bought the properties his wife forced into distress. The board members fanned out behind them like backup singers. Clipboards, tablets. The smug expressions of people who'd never been on the losing side of a confrontation. "Mr. Greaves!" Marguerite's voice didn't need the megaphone, but she used it anyway. "Your 72 hours ended at midnight. You are now officially trespassing on HOA property." I took a sip of my coffee, still standing, still not moving. "This is your final warning." She was actually enjoying this, I realized. The performance, the audience, the crushing of someone she perceived as weaker. "Vacate immediately or face the consequences." The lawyer stepped forward, adjusting his cufflinks with theatrical precision. "Sir, I'm Prescott Vanderholt, legal counsel for Pemberton Lake Estates. I've been practicing real estate law for 31 years. His voice carried the oily smoothness of someone who'd learned to make threats sound like favors. "I strongly advise you to vacate immediately to avoid criminal charges." I lowered my coffee cup. "Mr. Vanderholt, in your 31 years of practice, have you ever filed an HOA charter with the state?" His confident expression flickered. "Of course, dozens of times." "Then you know Section 23A of the Property Records Act requires all HOA charters to be filed within 90 days of formation." I kept my voice conversational, almost friendly. "Can you show me Pemberton Lake Estates' filing receipt?" Silence. The kind that settles over a battlefield when someone realizes they've walked into an ambush. "No?" I continued. "How about the environmental impact assessment for those dock structures? Section 31 of the Wetland Protection Act requires one for any construction within 500 feet of protected waters." Prescott Vanderholt's face was undergoing a fascinating transformation. Confident to confused to alarmed, like watching a time-lapse of a flower wilting. "The commercial operating license for your rental business, Section 47C, requires state licensing for any commercial activity on protected waterways." I turned to look directly at Marguerite, who had lowered her megaphone and was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "The federal tax filings for Pemberton Lakeside rentals, the liability insurance for commercial watercraft operations, the safety inspections for the dock structures that are, according to my preliminary assessment, at least 4 inches below the minimum water clearance requirements established in the 2019 Marine Safety Code." "I don't know where you learned to quote legal codes." Marguerite's voice had lost some of its honey, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. "But it doesn't matter. This is my community, my lake, my rules." She pulled out her phone, fingers jabbing at the screen with sharp, angry motions. I'm calling 911. This is criminal trespassing and harassment. We'll see how many legal codes you can quote from a jail cell. 15 minutes later, the patrol cars arrived. 2 of them, 4 officers. They pulled up behind the HOA convoy with their lights off, but their body cameras on. I noticed that detail immediately. Deputy Weston Calloway was the first to approach. Mid-40s, weathered face, the patient expression of someone who'd dealt with neighbor disputes before and had no particular interest in taking sides. "Sir, we've received a complaint that you're illegally occupying this property." He kept his voice neutral, professional. "Can you provide documentation?" I stood up for the first time since the convoy had arrived. I walked inside, came back with a folder I'd prepared 3 days ago, anticipating exactly this moment. Deed from the state of Michigan, dated 6 weeks ago. Property tax receipt, paid in full. Survey map from the county assessor's office, showing exact boundaries of Lot 7. I handed each document to the deputy as I spoke. This includes this house, this shoreline, and approximately 43 acres extending into the lake itself. Deputy Calloway examined the papers. His expression didn't change, but I saw his shoulders shift slightly. The unconscious body language of someone who's just realized the situation is nothing like what they were told. He turned to Marguerite. "Ma'am, these documents appear legitimate. This man owns this property." "That's impossible!" Marguerite's composure shattered like a dropped crystal. "Check it again. He must have forged them. I've been president of this HOA for 17 years. I know who owns what around here." "Ma'am, I'd advise you to step back and lower your voice." Colton Ashworth pushed forward, his red face even redder. "Officer, I've lived here for 20 years. I know who owns what around here. This land has been community property since—" "Mr. Ashworth." I interrupted him mid-sentence, keeping my voice perfectly calm. "The docks your company built are sitting on my lakefront, without permits, without permission." I paused, letting the words sink in. "I believe that's called trespassing, and possibly theft of services, and almost certainly several violations of the Wetland Protection Act, which carries fines of up to $50,000 per incident." The silence that followed was deafening. Deputy Calloway looked at Marguerite, at Colton, at Prescott Vanderholt, who had gone very pale and was clutching his briefcase like a life preserver, then back at me. "Sir, ma'am." His voice was carefully neutral. "I suggest you resolve this through proper legal channels, but I will note, based on the documentation I've seen, Mr. Greaves appears to be the legal owner of this property. Any further attempts to remove him could potentially constitute harassment." He handed my documents back, tipped his hat slightly, and walked back to his patrol car. The other officers followed. The engines started. The lights stayed off. They drove away without looking back. Marguerite Pemberton stood in my yard, watching the police cars disappear down the dirt road, her megaphone hanging forgotten at her side. Her husband was staring at me with the kind of hatred that usually takes years to develop. The lawyer was already on his phone, talking in rapid, hushed tones to someone who was probably going to send him a very large bill. "This isn't over," Marguerite said finally. Her voice had lost its honey. What remained was pure venom. "I have connections. I have resources. I have been running this community for 17 years, and I will not let some nobody with a piece of paper destroy everything I've built." "Mrs. Pemberton." I picked up my coffee cup, took a sip, still warm. "I've spent 42 years dealing with people who thought they were above the law. Chemical companies, corrupt developers, political fixers who believed rules were for other people. I met her eyes directly. They all made the same mistake. They assumed I was just someone with a piece of paper. I turned and walked back into my cabin. They didn't know I'd spent 4 decades writing the rules of the game they were trying to play. The convoy left eventually. I watched them go from my kitchen window, the G-Wagon leading the retreat like a general withdrawing from a battle that hadn't gone according to plan. I knew it wasn't over. This was just the opening skirmish. Marguerite Pemberton hadn't held power for 17 years by giving up after one setback. She was regrouping, planning, probably already making calls to whatever connections she thought could make her problem disappear. But I had connections too. 42 years of them. People in the Attorney General's office. People in the Environmental Crimes Division. People who owed me favors going back decades. People who remembered when I'd put my career on the line to protect their investigations from political interference. I was making my own calls when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Greaves, I know what Marguerite has done. Meet me at Pinewood Diner, 8 p.m. Come alone. E.M. I stared at the message for a long moment. It could be a trap. Marguerite had resources, connections, 17 years of practice at making problems disappear. Luring me to a remote location and, what, having me beaten up? Disappeared? But 42 years in bureaucracy had taught me something about human nature. When someone wants to meet in secret, when they specifically say, come alone, it usually means they have something to say that they're afraid of, something valuable, something dangerous. Whoever E.M., they were scared. And scared people often had the most important information. The Pinewood Diner sat at a crossroads about 15 miles from Pemberton Lake, far enough from the HOA's territory to feel neutral, close enough that the locals would still know the players involved. It was the kind of place that served coffee in thick ceramic mugs and pie that tasted like someone's grandmother had made it that morning. I arrived at 7:45 p.m., ordered coffee, and took a booth near the back where I could watch both exits. She came in at 8:15 p.m., looking over her shoulder twice before spotting me. Mid-30s, brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, dark circles under her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. She slid into the booth across from me with the nervous energy of someone who'd spent a long time working up the courage to do something terrifying. Thank you for coming, Mr. Greaves. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I know this seems strange. You said you know what Marguerite has done. I kept my own voice low, matching her energy. I'm listening. She looked around the diner again, checking faces, checking exits. When she spoke, the words came out in a rush, like she was afraid she'd lose her nerve if she stopped. My name is Elowyn Mercer. I was Marguerite's secretary for 4 years. I handled her calendar, her correspondence, her files. I saw everything. Her hands were shaking slightly as she wrapped them around her coffee mug. The real books, the shell companies, the families she destroyed. I leaned forward slightly. Tell me. Elowyn took a deep breath. It works like this. Marguerite identifies a property she wants, usually someone vulnerable. Elderly owners on fixed income. Single parents who can't afford lawyers. Anyone who won't fight back. Then the violations start. She finds something. Anything. Mailbox wrong color. Grass is too tall. Car parked on the wrong side of the driveway. The first fine is always small, a couple $100. Most people pay just to make it go away. But if they fight back, if they refuse to pay on principle, that's when it gets ugly. Late fees, interest, more violations. She has board members who will report whatever she tells them to report. Within a year, an unpaid $200 fine becomes a $20,000 lien. The properties become unsellable. No bank will touch them. No buyer wants to inherit the debt. That's when Colton's companies show up, offering to help, buying distressed properties at 30–40% below market value. Then they renovate and sell for 3 times what they paid. My coffee had gone cold. I hadn't noticed. 17 families, Elowen said, her voice cracking. In 12 years. Some of them had lived on that lake for generations. She took everything from them. Tell me about the worst one. Elowen's eyes filled with tears. She was clearly fighting not to shed. Cornelius and Winifred Hathaway. Her voice was barely above a whisper now. They'd lived on the lake for 31 years, built their home with their own hands, raised 3 children there, retired there. We were supposed to spend their golden years watching the sunset over the water they loved. In 2019, Marguerite cited them for a mailbox color violation. Their mailbox was forest green. The approved color was hunter green. The difference was so small you'd need a paint chip to tell them apart. The fine was $500. Cornelius refused to pay on principal, said it was extortion, which it was. So Marguerite added late fees, then interest, then administrative processing charges she invented out of thin air. Within 18 months, that $500 fine had become $23,000. She filed a lien, made the property unsellable. Colton offered to help, offered to buy the property for $140,000. It was worth at least $400,000. They had no choice. They were 76 years old. They couldn't afford a lawyer. They couldn't fight an organization that had been crushing people like them for over a decade. Elowen wiped her eyes with a napkin. Winifred had a breakdown during the move. The stress, the humiliation, losing the home she'd built with her own hands. She never recovered. She died 6 months later. The doctors called it heart failure. Cornelius says she died of a broken heart. He lives in a trailer park now, 78 years old. Lost everything because of a mailbox. The silence stretched between us. I thought about 42 years of fighting against exactly this kind of predatory behavior. The chemical companies that poisoned water supplies and blamed the victims. The developers who bulldozed wetlands called it progress. The politicians who took the bribes and looked the other way. I'd won some of those battles, lost others. Watched good people get crushed by systems designed to protect the powerful. But I'd never stopped fighting. Why are you telling me this? I asked finally. Elowen reached into her purse and pulled out a USB drive. She slid it across the table toward me. Financial records, fake liens, forged signatures, meeting minutes that were altered after the fact. Everything I could copy before they fired me 6 months ago for budget reasons. She made air quotes with her fingers, which really meant I was asking too many questions. I picked up the USB drive. It was surprisingly light for something that might contain evidence of a decade of fraud. Why me? Why now? Because you're the first person who fought back. Her voice steadied as she spoke. Everyone else, the Hathaways, the other families, they were alone, isolated. Marguerite made sure of that. She turned neighbors against each other, made people ashamed to admit they'd been victimized. But you stood on your porch while she had the police called on you, and you didn't blink. You quoted legal codes I'd never even heard of. You made her look like a fool in front of the people she uses to intimidate everyone else. For the first time in years, people are starting to ask questions. starting to wonder if maybe the HOA president isn't as untouchable as she wants them to believe. She leaned forward, intensity burning in her eyes. And I can't live with what I saw anymore. The files I kept because I was afraid to delete them. The families I watched get destroyed while I processed the paperwork. The way Marguerite laughed every time another property closed. If there's any chance of stopping her, any chance of getting justice for people like the Hathaways, I have to take it. I pocketed the USB drive and signaled for the check. Miss Mercer, I spent 42 years writing laws to protect people from predators like Marguerite Pemberton. I met her eyes directly. I never imagined I'd be the one getting to enforce them. But I promise you this. By the time I'm done, every family she destroyed will have their day in court. And Marguerite Pemberton will learn that the laws she's been breaking aren't just words on paper. They're words I wrote, and I know exactly how to use them. That night, I went through Elowin's files line by line. What I found was worse than anything I'd imagined. The embezzlement wasn't occasional skimming. It was systematic theft. At least $2.7 million diverted from HOA accounts to private shell companies over 12 years. Hidden under fake maintenance contracts, inflated improvement assessments, and emergency repairs that existed only on paper. The fake liens weren't isolated incidents. They were a manufacturing operation. Template documents with blank spaces for names, dates, and dollar amounts, ready to be filled in whenever a new target was identified. The meeting minutes had been altered so many times, there were multiple versions of the same meetings in the files. Original drafts, revised versions, and final official copies that bore almost no resemblance to what had actually been discussed. And the shell companies, Ashworth Holdings, Lakefront Development Partners, PLP Investments. All of them traced back to the same registered agent, the same P.O. box, the same bank accounts that somehow always seemed to have deposits right after distressed properties were acquired. The total amount stolen, $2.7 million at minimum. The families destroyed, 17 documented cases. The crimes committed, too many to count. I sat back in my chair, staring at the laptop screen, the weight of 42 years pressing down on my shoulders. I had enough evidence to destroy Marguerite Pemberton, enough to put her away for years, enough to get restitution for every family she'd victimized. But I also knew how these things worked. Prosecutors were overworked. Cases were complicated. Defense attorneys would drag out proceedings for years. And in the meantime, Marguerite would still be out there. Still running the HOA. Still destroying anyone who got in her way. I needed more. I needed to understand exactly how deep the corruption went. I needed to find every victim, document every crime, build a case so overwhelming that no prosecutor could ignore it, and no defense attorney could dismantle it. I needed to find out what else Marguerite Pemberton was hiding. And I was about to learn that her operation had secrets even Elowin didn't know about. Secrets that would make everything I'd discovered so far look like the tip of a very large, very ugly iceberg. The answer came at 6 a.m. the next morning, delivered not through documents or databases, but through destruction. I stepped onto my porch with my coffee and stopped cold. My dock had been reduced to splinters, wooden debris floating across the water like the aftermath of a shipwreck. Someone had spray-painted "Trespasser, go home" across the side of my pickup in bright red letters. A fine notice was taped to my front door, $15,000 for an unpermitted waterfront structure. The security camera I'd mounted near the porch had been smashed, but they hadn't known about the backup camera hidden in the old oak tree overlooking the property. I pulled the footage on my laptop. 2 a.m. 3 men with sledgehammers. A truck with a logo that was blurry but readable. Ashworth Construction. And there, directing the operation with his phone flashlight, was Colton Ashworth himself. I was photographing the damage when an old pickup truck pulled up the dirt road and stopped at a distance. The driver sat motionless for nearly a minute, wrestling with some internal decision. Then the door opened. The man who approached was in his mid-50s, with calloused hands and work clothes stained with oil and sawdust. He moved like someone carrying a weight far heavier than his frame. "I saw what they did last night, Mr. Greaves." His voice was rough, tired. "I was there." "You work for the HOA?" He nodded, eyes fixed on the ground. 9 years. Merritt Holloway. I maintained the docks, the boats, the lakefront. 9 years I kept my mouth shut because I needed the job. He finally looked up. "But this ain't right no more." Merritt opened his tool bag and produced a thick envelope. Photographs, time-stamped from 2 a.m. from and his crew destroying my dock. A work order signed by Marguerite authorizing emergency dock removal and paying $3,000 to her husband's company. A screenshot of a text message from Marguerite to Merritt sent at 11 p.m. "Stay away from Lot 7 tonight. Colton's handling a situation. You saw nothing." "This ain't the first time," Merritt continued. "I got records going back 7 years. Every time someone refused to sell, something happened to their property. Docks collapsed. Boats developed leaks. Fences fell down overnight." He handed me a USB drive. 17 properties. 17 families. I documented everything because I knew someday someone would fight back. "Why now, Merritt?" His eyes went to the lake, and when he spoke again, his voice cracked. "Because I helped them once. 7 years ago. The Hathaways. I was the one who loosened the bolts on their dock railing. Marguerite said it was just a prank, just to scare them." He swallowed hard. "But Mrs. Hathaway slipped, broke her hip, never walked right again. She passed away 6 months later." Tears welled in his eyes. "I've carried that for 7 years, Mr. Greaves. I can't carry it anymore." "What you did was wrong," I said quietly. "But what you're doing now takes more courage than most people ever find. Are you willing to testify?" "Whatever it takes." That afternoon, I made 3 phone calls. One to the State Attorney General's office. One to the Environmental Crimes Division. One to an old colleague at the State Water Board who owed me a favor from 1997. Then I made a 4th call. To Marguerite Pemberton herself. "There's an emergency HOA meeting tonight," I told her. 6 p.m. at the community center. "I think your residents deserve to hear the truth." She laughed. "You're out of your mind if you think I'm giving you a platform. You're right. You should probably cancel it, unless you want 200 people to wonder why you're afraid of a retiree with a piece of paper." The line went dead. At 6 p.m., over 200 residents packed the Pemberton Lake Estates Community Center. Marguerite stood at the podium in her light blue suit, flanked by Prescott Vanderholt and Colton Ashworth, radiating false confidence. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, honey dripping from every word. "As you may have heard, we have an intruder trying to claim our community lakefront. I want to assure you, our legal team is handling this, and our property rights are absolute." The doors opened. I walked in. "Security, remove this trespasser immediately." "Before you do that, Mrs. Pemberton, I think your neighbors deserve to know the truth." I connected my laptop to the projector. The first slide appeared. Financial records showing $2.7 million diverted to shell companies. The second, 17 properties bought through intimidation and resold at triple the price. The third, fake liens, forged signatures, altered minutes. The fourth, photos of last night's sabotage. Colton's face clear as day. "This is fabricated!" Marguerite shrieked. "Mrs. Pemberton, I spent 42 years as the principal legislative drafter for the Michigan State Water Board. I wrote every water law in this state, every environmental code, every property statute you've been violating for 17 years. I held up my old credentials and the governor's commendation letter. You're not fighting a confused retiree. You're fighting the man who wrote the rules you've been breaking." The doors opened again. Merritt Holloway walked in. Marguerite went pale. "Merritt, you're supposed to be quiet, like I've been for 9 years?" He stepped forward, facing the crowd. "My name is Merritt Holloway. I've maintained your lakefront for 9 years. And for 9 years, I've watched Marguerite Pemberton destroy families. Every accident was planned. Every violation was manufactured. I have proof of all of it." The room exploded. Residents shouted about boats that sank, fences that collapsed, liens that appeared from nowhere. "The Hathaways were our friends," an elderly woman cried. "You destroyed them over a mailbox?" Marguerite screamed for her lawyer to do something. Prescott Vanderholt slowly closed his briefcase. "Marguerite, I'm afraid I can't help you anymore. As of this moment, I'm withdrawing as your counsel." The next morning, 5 black SUVs rolled into Pemberton Lake Estates. State Attorney General investigators, Environmental Crimes Division, IRS Criminal Investigation. Special Agent Cordelia Vance approached Marguerite's house. "Marguerite Pemberton Ashworth, you are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, environmental crimes, and conspiracy to commit property theft." The handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Her light blue suit wrinkled as they led her away. "You'll regret this," she spat at me. "I have connections." "Mrs. Pemberton, I am the connection. I wrote the laws. I trained the investigators. You're not threatening a retiree. You're threatening the system itself." Colton was arrested at his construction site. Prescott surrendered at his office without resistance. The sentences came down 3 months later. Marguerite, 23 years federal. Colton, 12 years. Prescott, 5 years plus disbarment. Merritt received immunity for his testimony. 6 months after that, I sat on my rebuilt dock watching the sunset. The 17 families had received restitution. Cornelius Hathaway bought a small house near where Winifred was laid to rest. Merritt now managed maintenance for the new, democratically elected HOA board, spending his weekends repairing what he'd once helped destroy. Marcus called as the sun touched the water. 42 years writing laws, and this is how you retire? I laughed. Marcus, I spent 42 years putting words on paper. This is the first time I got to see those words actually protect someone. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't money or power. It's knowledge. Marguerite Pemberton spent 17 years believing she was above the law. She never bothered to read it. I spent 42 years writing it. Every section, every clause, every comma. She thought she was fighting a confused retiree. She was fighting the author. And authors always know how their stories end. If this story reminded you that justice exists, please take a moment to like and share this video. It helps more people see that sometimes the good guys do win. And let me know in the comments. Have you ever had to fight for what was yours? I'd love to hear your story. The lake reflects the sunset now. The water is clean. The families are safe. And somewhere in federal prison, Marguerite Pemberton is learning what she should have learned 17 years ago. Never pick a fight with the person who wrote the rule book.
Just sharing some good energy today. Like the video and subscribe to Red Stories.